Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunworks, where we learn about and share long-range shooting techniques, science, and gear.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Long Range Pursuit Podcast. Today we are covering, or what is this edition?
Do we call it Instructor's Corner, or do we?
Instructor's Corner.
Instructor's Corner.
Yeah, anytime the trainers are involved, I guess we'll call it Instructor's Corner. Sometimes they bleed over a little bit, but
makes us feel important since we're hanging out with you.
yeah, right.
Hey, anything I can do, buddy.
The little things, right?
You make me feel important when I get to go hunting with you.
There you go. Because things die, right?
Yeah.
So you guys just finished up shooting a match over the weekend, a little local precision rifle match.
Mm-hmm.
What I hear, I missed out. I should have planned and gone and joined in on the fun, but
and Chris has a lot of experience shooting precision rifle matches. And he's kind of been bugging me a bit to get into it, and I've just been busy and stuff. So I've been in this world for a long, long time, and almost embarrassed to admit it, but this past weekend was my first ever precision rifle match. Nice. At least in that format. I've shot SWAT sniper competitions, and I did like a Marine Corps sniper competition.
No big deal.
Way back when, but just this, what everybody's doing out there in these precision rifle matches, really interesting. It was a kind of a enlightening and slightly humbling experience at the same time, doing that. And, one of the benefits, I think, anytime you can put yourself in kind of an uncomfortable situation, and, being a former Marine Scout sniper instructor and going out in front of a bunch of people that know who you are and doing something where you might fail, that's a little pressure. So
you gotta leave your ego at the door when you're doing that kind of thing.
But there's a lot of benefit that comes from it, because anytime you do something that puts you in a little bit of an uncomfortable position, you're really teaching yourself how to function under stress.
Yeah.
And I think that's the main benefit that hunters get from shooting these types of matches is, you're on the clock, you've got some stress, you've got to go through this, kind of detailed system to dial, call wind, build a position, press a good shot, run the bolt, get another good shot, whatever the stage requires, and you're doing it under stress. And the better you get at doing that under stress, I really do think the better you're going to respond in hunting situations. And, talking a little bit about the, some of the mistakes I made. Well, any one of those mistakes could have easily happened when it mattered. So if I can iron out those mistakes and find out where I'm prone to making errors, in competition versus when it really matters in the hunting world, then I'm ahead.
A lot of these different match, what would you call it, like disciplines or styles?
Yeah, formats, I guess.
The formats, they have kind of their different angles and different purposes, and I think there are skills that apply in some of those formats and don't apply in other formats, right? And some that cross over well into, we've always been kind of hunting focused is kind of our thing, or at least my mindset. And so, some of those skills translate into the hunting field applications, and some maybe don't as much. But regardless, you're learning quite a bit, and jumping from one to one. I had I was lucky to have Chris kind of hold my hand on the first couple of those first precision rifle matches that I jumped into, and that's definitely not my cup of tea. Like, they're fun to shoot, and it's the same thing. Like, I walk away learning quite a bit. Those race gun matches, I think, the focus is really on speed. You're putting down 10 to 12 rounds downrange in a matter of usually a 2 minute. Or sometimes 2.5, depending on the match, right?
Yeah, I guess depending on the format.
So very, very kind of race gun type format, usually very heavily dependent on kind of some really weird, awkward, positional, tricky scenarios. You're shooting off of wobbly barricades and 50-gallon drums that are shaking around on you, and tractor tires, and climbing into a doghouse with little ports to shoot out of, and just kind of weird stuff like that. Movers, I'd never, short of whacking coyotes on the run, never really shot movers. So that was
you probably have more experience with that than the rest of us.
I've shot a few of those. I've done a few of that. Yeah. But again, it's, some of that stuff translates and some of it doesn't, but I think it's a lot of just learning how to adjust on the fly. And like you said, to operate under pressure, I think is a big deal. One kind of pressure and another kind of pressure, it's still pressure and it's still stress at the end of the day. Whether it's a deer running over the hill or the guy yelling at you to get behind the gun, or your buddy yelling at you, or a bear charging you, or whatever it is. There's a lot of different scenarios there that.
Yeah, there's half a dozen stories already coming to mind here, just from this match this weekend, and how they can translate to hunting situations, right?
Yeah.
So everything from equipment failures to ego failures to just not really thinking things through, right? Not doing the whole process.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And I think everybody on our squad, especially myself, was like we had some screw ups and some stuff that we would do in a hunting situation.
I had some events that I crushed, and then I had some events that I just completely blew it out my ass.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the ones that you think lapses. You should have cleaned that you don't, right?
Yeah. I think when you go into this stuff and when you're trying to translate it into a training experience, so you're using competition as a means to an end, as opposed to the end is to do well in competition. I approached it from the perspective of like, I'm not going to shoot a race gun. I'm going to shoot a hunting rifle. So I brought a 9-pound 6.5 Creedmoor that I call Fugly, kind of a Franken gun that's a half Gunworks and half Remington, but shoots very well. And my mentality is like, anything that I learned here, I wanted to translate over to the equipment that I use in the field. And so I think the mentality as well going into it, if I look back into my previous life, years and years ago, me and a few friends used to occasionally shoot like IPSC competitions, with pistol, which is classic race gun, but we would just go as friends, a couple of us would go, and we would hold ourselves to some rules where we're not going to use bad tactics, like you have to do well in these competitions. So we're really just shooting against ourselves and shooting against each other. For example, I'm not going to move to another position with an empty gun and reload on the way. I'm going to reload before I leave cover, just little tactical things. And I think if you apply the same concept to these matches, where you're really just shooting against a buddy or shooting against yourself, as opposed to trying to win the match, where you might do things that maybe aren't correct, but they give you a leg up in the match.
Yeah. We've had a lot of internal debate. Okay, is match shooting even our thing? Like, do we even waste our time talking about it or not? And at the end of the day, like you're saying, I look at match shooting as a training opportunity, right? I don't really see it as a sport. Some people are going to love what I'm trying to say, and some people are going to hate it. But I look at it as a means to an end, right? It's practice for me to go hunting in the fall, and I think a lot of guys like to do it as a sport and as it's the pastime, right? Is the shooting the match, and that's great. Like that's every sport eventually makes it to that level, right? Is people do it because for the sake of doing it rather than for training for something else, I guess. But whether you are excited about match shooting as a sport or not, it does become a really great training tool. And it's sometimes something like that, rather than just going out and shooting at the range. Again, it just adds a little bit of element of stress and time commitment and requirement and pressure to add that little edge to your training, rather than just kind of a casual day out the range and, I missed that one. Oh, well, I'll hit it on the next one. I'll walk it in. Like, when you're,
there's 2.5 points down the drain.
You've got a bunch of time and a bunch of product and a bunch of ammo and a match fee applied, all of a sudden those points and those rounds count just a little bit more for you than, let me go walk it in on steel next time I'm at the range.
So what was the format of the different stages? What were you held to do? What were the distances in some of the stages?
I guess time limit? Each stage kind of had its own concept or its own what's the word I'm looking for? Each stage kind of had its own personality.
Yeah.
You know, and some of the stages were, you know, set up so you had to, you know, you're doing a lot of movement and you only shot one shot per position, and all those positions were borderline unstable. You know, and so you'd have a kind of a concept for shooting that. There was another stage that was strictly long range. I think the closest shot was 950 yards, and the furthest was about 1150.
Yeah,
something
so
like that.
Majority of most of these club matches, they're at a shooting venue, say Cody Shooting Complex here, which everything is. There's the long range stage, which is maybe 850 and out, but most everything else is sub 800, and some of it's 300 to the majority of it's 600-ish, right? And so it's shots that you are capable of making from very unstable, very...
You're very rarely just getting prone. And
There's almost no
right?
prone on the whole thing. So it makes those shot distances appropriate for the shooting requirements.
Yeah.
I guess. So you're shooting, a lot of stuff was, let's say, something a lot of guys are familiar with, especially like hunting antelope, shooting off of the top of a fence rail, right? And so it was shoot off of, you have 10 shots in 2 minutes and 10 positions you can only use once. So go hit the clock, you set up on one position on the fence, shoot one round, move to another position on the fence. So maybe you moved up and across or down and back. And so, getting is really big, like we teach in class, and it's getting squared up on the rifle. And what I really screwed myself on that stage is I haven't been shooting a lot this year. I am jerking the trigger like there's no tomorrow, right? And when you're only supported on just a fence rail, you got a bag on that fence rail, your rifle on that, you jerk the trigger, the rifle moves. It's not, I'm doing the same thing, shooting a 9-pound hunting gun, right, with a big muzzle brake on it, whatever, but still not a 20-pound race gun. And, the thing can move if you don't have your fundamentals right. You're not squared up behind the rifle. You're not tracking your impacts. You're not seeing what the wind's doing. So there's a lot of parallels. That's one example. Another example is a mover, right? A mover at 400-ish yards, right? And so of course it's a coyote, and we're probably not shooting at a deer or elk, on purpose if it's moving at 400 yards. But you can actually drop into that one and say, where were some mistakes on that one? I think it's something about a second focal plane scope or something, huh?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I was going to bring that up as some of the errors I made. The stuff that you think you can work around.
We got so many errors. We can do 45 minutes on this.
We got a couple episodes just on errors, and then we got like maybe half an episode on what we did right.
Yeah. So I'm curious, was it unplanned, or did you plan and miscalculate with your second focal plane?
Well, it's basically what's on that rifle,
right?
And really, what it comes down to is I have this old, Night Force NXS 30 millimeter, 3 to 15 scope, and it's a great scope, and that's, passed from rifle to rifle to rifle, and now it's landed on this 6.5 Creedmoor, and I thought with the 6.5 Creedmoor being a fairly minimal recoil, that I can probably always shoot it at the highest power and still have a big enough field of view that I can, keep my target in sight, which is a reason that it got taken off of the 30 Nosler, because there was no way you could run that at 15 power on the 30 Nosler, and manage recoil and spot your own impacts. So I'm like, I can probably run it on the 6.5, but, for the most part I could. But like with that mover, that 15 power gives you a pretty small field of view. So you're trying to find and track a moving target, or ambush a moving target, but it pops into your field of view and it is at your crosshairs before you know it.
Wow.
Whereas had I been able to crank that thing down to,
you can watch
say,
it
10
move
power,
in.
I could have watched it coming and probably been much more prepared and, be pinning the trigger right when it hit that perfect lead amount, but it would come into my field of view so fast. My lead was about 3 minutes, and it would be through that 3 minutes before I even hardly had time to, settle on it.
Sight picture?
Get a sight picture. So like I think my first 3 shots on that I shot behind just because that target was beating me to that 3 minute mark because my field of view was so narrow. Had it been a first focal plane, I'd have simply turned the power down and had much more, warning that is coming into my field of view, but I needed that 3 minutes to be correct, for my lead.
See, and I'd wondered if you tried to game it and turn your magnification down and try to like double your subtensions or something like that. I mean, you could get really tricky with it if you really wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, I find when I do stuff like that,
You're just adding
my brain just turns to mush really quick.
More opportunities for error, for sure.
I mean, theoretically, I could sit here and figure that out, but I guarantee you, under the stress and the heat of the competition, and I think the same thing applies. If you think you can do it under the stress and heat in hunting, well, if you can't do it under the stress and heat of competition, you're probably going to fall on your face trying to apply the same thing.
Well, it's a great explanation for why we've switched to all first focal plane scopes and everything that we're offering, because if that magnification isn't at max power when you're making that shot, then your wind calls are all screwed up.
And talking about the same event, shooting off the fence that Chris was talking about, there's quite a bit of wind blowing when I set up to shoot that event. So when I'm, watching the guy ahead of me, there's a good, 10, 15 mile per hour wind blowing. So even though the shots aren't that hard, there was about 2 minutes of wind there. And I wanted to be able to run a lower power so my wobble's not being magnified. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to dial for that wind. So I dialed for that wind, that 2 minutes. That way I didn't have to worry about my magnification. And lo and behold, as soon as I was getting set up, basically they said go. I think the wind backed off a little bit. So I dialed the 1 minute. I backed it off to 1 minute. Okay. And guess where I put the first 3 shots? 1 minute off the right edge. So it's just, because I never dial. I mean, we always hold. Yeah. And honestly, I kind of forgot that wind was on there, until I, really spotted an impact good. And I realized, wow, I still got that minute of wind on here. Yeah. And the Mirage is now boiling. So rather than that intuitive holding what I think it is at the moment, I had tried to game it and make up for the disadvantages of that second focal plane scope by dialing it. And it kind of bit me.
Yeah.
Probably won't be shooting with another second focal plane to match again.
Either that or I'll get better at running at one of the two.
Yeah. Well, it's training, right? You learned a heck of a lot. I learned a heck of a lot. I have apparently forgot a heck of a lot when it comes to these matches because I haven't been shooting this year. But that's training, right? And $50 entry fee and 100 rounds of ammo. It's like that is some of the cheapest, best training you're going to get. And it's people kind of get tired of hearing about the competition world. Maybe sometimes it's all over now. It's the big thing to do, but put yourself in the mindset of this is meant to replicate shooting scenarios, whether in the background, maybe in the law enforcement type competition, they were shooting IPSC, pistol type competition. It was designed to replicate a scenario, right? Yep. And these hunting situation or these precision rifle matches are designed to replicate a scenario.
Yep.
And so poor shooting. I guess you wouldn't say position, but scenarios, and longer targets and wind and something moving, and you really got to think about it. The mindset is like, how does this parallel the elk hunt that I did last fall and screwed up on, or the one I could do this next year? It's like, I've got a $25,000 sheep hunt, coming up in October, and man, I wish I'd have practiced at 600 yards. The outfitter's telling me now we're not going to see anything under 300 yards. Like, well, I never shot 600 yards.
Yeah.
What's a wind doing at 600 yards? I don't know. I've never shot in a wind.
Yeah.
Go spend a day, shoot a local club match, and I mean, it's a lot. You
learn a lot.
Even if you finished 44 out of 45, it's like you probably walk away with a lot more value than that $50 in entry fee and 100 rounds of ammo.
Absolutely.
I'm really partial to these NRL hunter matches that this new series that they've done the last 2 years because, again, every kind of format has its own advantages, but I think the advantage they're trying to tailor it to the hunting crowd, right? So they're making it a much more hunting style approach. It's blind targets, so you're finding targets on the clock. You're starting in a position where you have to run to your shooting position, build a position on the clock. And so, again, the emphasis there, I think, is a lot more on some of your gear management, some of your finding and target acquisition skills, and figuring out dope on the clock, where a lot of these precision rifle matches, you have a book that says you're going to shoot this target, this target, this target, this target at these ranges, and you're sitting there watching guys do it. And so you basically have a game plan ahead of time. Yeah. It's much more, okay, can you make a plan and execute that plan on the clock fast versus I don't know what's going to happen here, but I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right?
Know where the targets are.
You walk in blind, you've got a gun and a backpack full of gear, and a mag full of ammo, and they say go, and you got 4 minutes to run up there and find some targets and hopefully hit them.
Yeah.
And, and so it's all the gear, explosion, yard sale, this stuff, knocking over
really turn into a
binocular,
yard
breaking.
sale.
I can't tell you how many pairs of binoculars I've seen broken. And I mean, it gets interesting, but it's
That'd
a lot
be
of fun.
Yeah.
So we need to get you out one of those and see how you like it.
I kind of fell on my face just doing this. And I was able to game plan. I can't imagine if I didn't have a plan going into it.
That's the point of it, right? That's the point of it. Like I mean, the first one, man, I had so many, and I still do it every one I shoot. But it's a really good learning experience. So.
Yeah, the other big error I caught myself making, and it just kind of shows how under stress you revert back to maybe what you did for a good portion of your life.
Sure.
Was I think based on kind of the way we'd always shot on the law enforcement side is, you're always responding very quickly to a threat that pops up somewhere out in front of you. Mm-hmm. So natural point of aim was kind of a luxury that you normally didn't have. So a lot of our shooting was based on kind of bear hugging the rifle, driving it towards that threat, and exaggerating your follow through so that you could shoot without a good natural point of aim. And what I caught myself doing the further I progressed in the match is I caught myself bear hugging the rifle. And usually once I started missing, absent a wind mistake or something like that, when it was like I missed because I screwed that shot up, I caught myself bear hugging that rifle again rather than just kind of that light grip and light shoulder pressure.
Yeah. My big takeaway from the match is I found myself just punching the trigger. It's like how many hundreds and thousands of rounds and how many hundreds of barrels it seems like I've been through. And I shot one club match in April this year, and then this club match now it's July. We're in July, right? And I'm punching the trigger, right? And with a 10-pound rifle, it's like it moves, and I can't believe I do that. I can't believe I still do that at this point. How many thousands of rounds downrange, and I still, my brain doesn't tell me to, squeeze the trigger or press the trigger, I guess.
It's a never-ending battle.
It takes time, right?
Yep.
And it takes practice. And so you have to put time into practice. And so if you're going to be consistent, repetition is a big deal.
Yep.
And natural point of aim is a big deal. And especially if you're punching the trigger, because if you're not squared up behind the gun, then the gun's going to move.
Yep.
Right? Every time you go to pull that trigger, the gun's going to move. You get stressed out, and then you do the thing that we all do, and it's you squeeze the rifle, and it's everything's jerking. I want to get the shot off fast. It's like, oh, the reticle hit the target, boom, send it. Right? Instead of where is the reticle on the target? Okay, it's where I want it to be on the target, and then press the trigger.
I think it goes back to that kind of concept that I saw, with a lot of the IPSC shooters when I learned from, shooting IPSC matches way back when, is they kind of had this mentality that if they shot 200 rounds on a match on the weekend, well, they needed to do 1,000 dry fires that week to undo the damage that shooting 200 live rounds did to them. Because anytime you're dealing with recoil, you're really just, blast and recoil, you're really just learning to flinch a little bit better. And only so unless you're dry firing outnumbers your real rounds, which with none of us it does, I guarantee you, because we're not disciplined enough to really put that amount of time into dry firing. But people that are really, really good, that's the amount of training they put into dry firing, because they want their body to revert to how it responded dry firing, not respond to how it fires live rounds. And the only realistic way to do that is if your dry fires outnumber your live rounds by a pretty significant margin. So
that's a good point. I hadn't thought about. I had a good one that really reminded me of a hunting situation is my nephew. He's 15 now, and so I haven't got to shoot with him much this year. Kind of got him into it a little bit last year, and then him and his dad have really taken it on really well this year. I bet they've shot 10 matches or something.
Oh wow!
And he's 15, so he's getting to the point where he knows a lot, right? He knows more than I do. And so he quits listening. And so he's shooting a stage where he's using a tripod rear support, and so gets on the rifle, and then he's dragging the tripod around, and you look at the tripod and it's one leg and the other two are just kind of spinning around in the air, right?
It's two monopods instead.
So he's got this and held up against the stock or whatever. And then Pete, the local match director, and he's a very talented shooter and, very knowledgeable trainer as well. And, he says, Weston, get over here, get your rifle, and sets him up behind that barricade. And he says, you need to drag that tripod underneath because the tripod doesn't do you any good unless you got all three legs on the ground. and he says, otherwise it's just floating around in the air. It's worthless, right? Well, 3 stages down the line is this fence one, and Weston's going to use this tripod as a rear support, whatever, And so he shoots one side, 3 or 4 shots and good. And then he transitions over to the other side of the fence, and he just goes around the tripod and then tries dragging the tripod underneath him and in front of him, right? Like, what, is that going to work for you? Is that stable? I'm just going to shoot it, while he's on the clock. It's like, so he shoots and misses. How did that work for you? And you're like, I'm just going to shoot it. Well, think about, like last year I shot an antelope and had to use a tripod, tall grass and whatnot. Yeah. And 400 and something yards. And so I get the gun, get on that tripod, I'm using a bag, and then I set the rifle on top of the bag on the tripod. And it's like, I cannot steady that rifle. I've got too much movement. It's like, it's bigger than the kill zone. My wobble's bigger than the kill zone. And I'm thinking, I'm just going to shoot it. And fortunately it stood still long enough that I thought about it, and I went and got my other tripod. I had 2 tripods in the truck, and I brought that second one out as a rear support and got it underneath me and actually used my supports as they were meant to be used. Yeah. And so they were useful. Right. And so we get this ego in front of us, and this happens a lot in your hunting situations, especially on a tripod. If you have to take a shot off tripod, you're unsteady. Send it anyways, right? It's like they're gonna get away. I'm gonna send it anyways. Yeah. And
don't want to fall into that trap.
Yeah, discipline. You really have to have the discipline to actually jump in and do it. And we see that in class too. Yep. Especially when we get into the stress drills, right? Guys just, their brain goes out the window. We spent 3 days, learning this stuff. And then when it comes time under stress, it's easy for us to sit back and say, hey, are you stable? And they're like, I gotta shoot. Panic.
A big piece of it is that repetition. Like you go and do a match, and it's 10 stages or 20 stages or over the course of 2 days or whatever. And it's like, you're doing it over and over and over again. And I mean, all the studies show, like, you don't learn from doing a thing once or twice or 3 times. You learn from doing it over and over and over again. So I think that the repetition is pretty valuable.
And kind of to piggyback on what Chris was talking about, the tripods for rear support, on my very short list of things I did right, was the mentality I went in there with was, anytime I can use rear support, whether it was a tripod or whether it was a bag, I'm going to have rear support. And that's one of the things that saved me, to a certain degree, is anytime that I could use a rear support, I had a rear support. And just tried to really minimize the potential for me to throw the shot because I wasn't stable.
Yeah, that's when I fight my dad with. I get him out shooting and just shooting prone, and I give him a bag, and I could give him a full-size pump pillow, and he would still float that rifle over the top of it. Yeah. Right? I'm like, Dad, use the bag. Next thing you know, the bag's laying on the ground and he's holding the fork. Right? We saw that this week in class, last week in class, right? Like, use the rear support, Dad. Come on.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny because, in our LRU level 2 classes, guys at that point in time have probably spent 3.5 days shooting how we teach them to. Then we run a pretty good stress drill at the end, and you see all the old techniques come back out that they haven't used in 3 days, but under stress they're reverting back to what's the most familiar. And you see the hands creeping up to the forehand again, and you see some of this stuff happening. That's the value of training under a little bit of stress.
Well, and that's my point on the repetition too, right? Yeah. It's that stress and that repetition where it becomes second nature rather than a thought process, right? And basically they're reverting to their nature because they've done it for over and over again for who knows how many decades. Yeah. So if you can get that process in where it just becomes muscle memory rather than okay, what do I do next? They told me I need to do this instead of that. It's like, if it's just part of what you do, that's when I think you really become reaching that kind of level of mastery.
And I think you need to successfully do it correctly under stress.
Yeah,
a few times before your brain reverts back to the last time it was under stress. Yeah. So it's I don't think doing it on the living room floor, although that's beneficial, I don't think that really puts your brain in a place where it's going to revert back to that technique until you've recalled it under stress.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So you say using the rear support was a few of the small wins.
Yeah.
But there were some stages you did pretty well on. So, I mean, like I think, long range stage, I think he crushed it. And I know when I shot that long range stage, I had 3 different winds. I had the wind changed on me twice. And so what I started shooting, and then, I'd get halfway through it and I missed, and I realized I missed because the wind fell off.
Yeah.
And then I corrected on the next one. But I think he dang near cleaned that stage.
Actually, the last target, I think, was the
last target.
The only one I didn't.
Yeah.
And the wind dropped off to nothing. And I knew I was running out of time on the clock.
That's what it was.
So I ran that thing like a belt-fed bolt rifle without taking time to spot my impacts.
Yeah.
And I wasn't holding for spin drift. Yeah, because there's probably a full minute of spin drift out there. And I think you were spotting all 3 rounds went right off the right edge, right?
That was the 1090 target, so 1090.
Yeah.
And you had something like 7 seconds left. And 3 rounds, there were 2 rounds in the air, I think, at the same time.
I was running that gun.
And at 1090, I guarantee that group was less than a pipe plate. It was sub MOA at 1090, and all rounds went off in sub 7 seconds.
Just in the wrong spot.
Yeah. I mean, it was dirt splash, dirt splash, dirt splash, time. What just happened here? There's not that many people who can run a rifle that fast, but it didn't give you time to see where the first one hit. Because the second one was
much
in the
better
air.
off just pausing for that second.
Yeah.
Because it would have clicked if I had taken the time to see where it was going rather than just being already on the trigger to fire the next one before the first one even got there.
But I was on glass and I saw the wind fall off, right? I mean, as he went from, it was an 1140 something or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, oh, there it went. Bang, bang, bang. Well, wind fell off.
Yeah.
So there were a few wins at least on that day. So I think just walking away from it, understanding what you did or didn't do was
absolutely
a really big deal.
And the reality is, I mean, the mistakes are way more valuable than the wins because mistakes you learn from.
Sure.
So you probably learn more if you go and kind of fall on your face a little bit than if you go there and crush it.
Yeah.
As far as what's the value to you as a hunter, I think falling on your face is, in that situation is probably a good thing because that means you learned something.
I think there's a lot of apprehension for guys to go and fail. I mean, I can certainly think like back wanting to go shoot a couple of these matches is like, I don't know anybody there. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to look like an idiot, and I feel like I have a general ability to kind of let my ego go just a little bit, maybe more than some, but still it's a hard thing to do. I guess 2 questions is, how does a guy convince himself to go actually shoot a match? And the other is, if you're not going to go shoot a match, how can we incorporate some of these time stresses and or pressures into just say a range session to glean some of that similar benefit from a range session rather than just going out and walking targets in on?
I think first off, the apprehension, of going to a match, and I've read and I've heard this time and time again, that community is a bunch of the nicest folks you'll ever meet. Yep. I mean, I showed up with just, basically a rifle and a couple bags and a tripod, and guys are like, hey, you want to borrow this? You want to borrow this? You want to borrow this? So everybody on our squad was really helpful. So, I mean, I think, and that's a common theme that I've heard, whether it's reading or on other podcasts is like, hey, that community is very open and, the best people there, are going to have their bad days. So they're way more worried about how they did that day. They don't really,
how you're doing.
They are certainly not watching you going, wow, I can't believe you did that.
I agree there 100%. And I think the thing I would add is, if you could find a friend to go with, I think that's obviously the easiest thing, right? And like, start reaching out to people and say, hey, I've never shot one. I'll guarantee that they're going to be like, hey, well, there's one coming up here in a couple weeks. Come out and join my squad and we'll shoot together. But, the other thing I would say is, you gotta, like I said earlier, you gotta kind of leave your ego at the door and just show up and say, what, I'm here to have fun. I'm here to learn. I'm not here to win this thing. Right. I mean, you remember that first match we shot, I was like, I'm just here to frickin' have fun. Yeah. And that might have been one of the best matches I ever shot, but
you started carrying it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but show up to have fun. But I would show up and tell the match director, the people checking in, it's like, hey, I've never shot a match before. They'll probably squad you with someone that they know is going to take you under the wing and help you out. And tell your squad mates like, hey, I've never shot, give me some feedback, ask questions. Yeah, a lot of good people, and I think a lot of ways to learn.
New shooter.
Yeah.
That was his first match. His name is Brian, also on our squad.
Oh, okay.
And you know what? It's like he didn't win the match, but guess what? He didn't finish last either.
Yeah.
And he walked away from it with still no ego. He wasn't crying, didn't get his feelings hurt or anything, but he showed up with positive attitude. We helped him gear and everything we could, and what were you doing and why? And he was shooting an off the shelf, Remington, whatever. And he probably had half the money into his entire setup is what some people have in their rifle scopes, right? And he just showed up and did it. And and
he had some pretty good hits.
Yeah. So it was good to see, and like our match director here, it's like when we go do the match brief, first thing he does is I want you guys hands in the air if you've shot less than 2 matches. And everybody look around, take care of these guys. He said there's $200,000 worth of equipment just sitting around out here. There's 8 shooters at a time, one per stage. And he's like, just give them your equipment. Let's help these guys. And so it's a big it's a big part of it. It's a big part of the experience. So.
Getting to the second part of your question, I think if guys aren't going to do the matches, they don't have the ability to, or they don't have the locality to. Anytime you can train under stress, and really the other way to create that stress is physical exertion.
Sure.
And one of my favorite, SWAT training events, that I'd run often was intermixing a CrossFit type workout with shooting.
Sure.
So they're just, and usually the shooting was very simple. Basically just, it might just be a pistol, and, you run here, you do some burpees, you do some push-ups, run back up to the line, shoot 2 shots, run back, do this, and maybe we'd go for like 20 minutes total time. And so they'd push themselves at a pace because they had to do a certain amount of work before they're allowed to shoot again, and the goal is to have the most hits on target. So therefore, the faster you move, the more you get to shoot. But at the same time, you're not moving so fast so you hit that point where you can't shoot. So you're teaching yourself the same thing. You're teaching yourself to shoot and just apply good fundamentals under a little bit of stress that comes from I'm huffing and puffing, I'm out of breath, which is very similar to the effect that adrenaline has on you in stressful situations. You may not have done anything physical, but you get an adrenaline dump from a stressful situation, you're going to start breathing hard, your heart rate's going to pick up. We can match that with physical exertion and get some of the benefits of training under stress without any real stress aside from the physical exertion.
Yeah, I like that. One thing, I probably sound like a broken record. I've probably mentioned this numerous times, but once I have a setup, I've got a load dialed in, I've got my rifle setup that I'm planning on hunting with in the fall. One thing that I like to do, and this is probably not very easy for a lot of guys to do that don't have easy access to a range, but I will literally go out and allow myself 1 shot in the morning to make a shot count, right? It's like I don't get a follow-up. I don't get an adjustment, and so I'm trying to deliberately train myself out of this mindset that I can walk a bullet in, right? And so it's cold bore, walk out basically. I'm headed to work. I've got a range, right on the back step, so it makes it easy to do. But also that rifle's acclimated, right? It's been sitting out in the cold truck all night long, and so it's like it's very, very realistic scenario. Walk out, get a range, 1 round, and if I miss, I gotta drive. I've got an hour drive to work. I get to drive an hour to work, agonizing over why I missed that shot. And it's like I've learned that really starts. That's not a time pressure. It's not a exertion pressure, but it's a mental like. This counts almost as much as making a shot on that.
Because I got to live with this until tomorrow when I get to shoot another one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's been kind of a fun game that I'll play with myself. Yeah. But just another way to introduce some make it count, I guess.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get home, hug the kids. Get home from work, hug the kids, and go right back out and see if you can't recover.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. For sure.
Going shooting.
Yeah. Exactly.
Got to redeem myself.
I mean, I think there's some timed things that you could do as well. It'd be very easy to set up a drill where you're out of the range, and rather than taking 10 minutes to get set up for the perfect shot, kind of set your own scenario where it's like, okay, the rifle's not laid out on a nice mat with a bipod, the target's not lazed and dialed into whatever your ballistic calculator is. It's literally on the clock, pull out my rifle, range the target, dial in your dope, figure out what your wind is on the clock, and time yourself and see how efficient you are. You do this over and over and over again. I think that kind of thing, you would start, again, that repetition, you start building kind of a process where, okay, my first step is lay the rifle down, point it at the target. Don't point it 45 degrees off in the other direction, and then try to hunt for the target through the scope. Do I dope my wind first and then range, or do I range first and then dope the wind? Getting that process kind of dialed in, I think.
Yeah, we actually see that with some of the events we run at LRU and level 2. Where basically, everybody has 2 shots for a target. You get your initial call, and then you get a follow up. And what we'll see a lot is everybody wants to range the target first. But the reality is, if they're using that BR4 to its fullest capability, you should be toggling your wind in there. So really, your first step is to toggle wind into that. Get your wind and toggle it into BR4. Mm-hmm. Now, when you laze it, you're getting your come ups that are taking aerodynamic jump and stuff like that into account, and you're getting your wind hold. Whereas if you range it first, put that on your turret, and then go think about back. Wind. Did you ever really come back to see if aero jump or something like that is going to impact your elevation? And you just duplicate, doubled the amount of time you spend tinkering with the laser, because now you got to laser it a second time to get your wind hold. Yeah. So just getting that process down, where the first thing I do is run the wind meter and put my wind into the laser. Now I laser the target. Now I have everything I need. So just like you were saying, if you're disciplined and you have a very methodical approach to what order you do things in, you're more likely to do it correctly under stress without leaving something out.
For sure.
Note, I used the BR4 for my ballistics for the entire match, and I didn't have any issues vertically. I had a lot of issues upstairs, but not vertically. So I've gotten to the point where I just live and die by that thing.
The wind, I mean, there's a lot of ways to get a drop solution, but to me, the wind features in there are so money. Yeah. And I'll tell you, shooting that PMR, right? It's the same thing. You got the same wind rosette, same function in the Revic, the scope versus the rangefinder. At those matches, those NRL hunter matches. Now that scope's a little heavy for a hunting rifle, but I'm trying to weigh my hunting rifle down to get it a little bit close. I'm gaming the system just a little bit, but trying to get close to that weight limit. And being able to dial in that wind, fine tune it on the fly, freaking fast. It's money. And you've got your base wind built in, right? So it's like, it's always a 10 mile per hour, 3 or a 9 full value wind, then it's really nice.
Yeah, that was a big change I made over this past year, having that BR4 is. It's just, I've got an ARCA plate set up on it, and at the matches we're all sitting there looking through binos on a tripod or something. So I just clip it in my tripod, I hit my ranges, write them down on my dope card, hit my range, dial in dope card. It's done. I don't even look at the matchbook anymore, just to know where the targets are.
Why?
I could care less what's written on there. I just hit a range on it anyways. So it's kind of a nice piece of equipment. NRL Hunter, that thing is just, that's the tool for that.
Range finding bino is really nice in that scenario, but who knows?
Yeah, that'd be even better.
Yeah. I kind of had that on the list of my other, win or things that went well. It's just, the process I went through to validate my trajectory, with my ammunition prior to going out to that match. I spent probably an hour, and then to show up that morning and everything was spot on out to 1150 or whatever that furthest target was. That was kind of one of my other list of wins on that one, is my data was spot on.
Yeah, as soon as you had that muzzle brake turned on, right? I screwed with him the week before. He always shot a suppressor on that rifle, and so he put a muzzle brake on it to go, get ready to go shoot this match. And he wasn't looking. I took that muzzle
Turn
brake.
it upside
I
down.
spun it upside down.
So the rifle's
So
doing this. Huh?
he'll tell you, but he didn't even notice it.
Hey, it's a 6.5. It kicks way less than stuff I'm used to
Hey,
shooting.
if your fundamentals are good, right? Yeah.
So what was it, Friday when we went to go do our last validation or whatever?
Yeah.
I spun that brake back right side up and couldn't figure out why I wasn't zeroed anymore.
Yeah, it changed my zero by a good, minute and a half, I think.
I believe
Yeah.
it.
Which is pretty amazing when you
That's
think about it,
interesting.
like how that would do it, because theoretically your bullet's gone before the muzzle
Before the
brake has
brake's
any
hitting
impact on anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
It's like, but I've seen that where rotating a muzzle brake will change your zero, and it's just always blown my mind how that can be the case.
So, and for guys that don't know, right, the ports on our muzzle brake, the first port is angled forward, and so you're forcing the barrel, the tip of the barrel down with that muzzle blast to negate muzzle rise, right?
Yeah.
So you turn that thing around, and it's the opposite. You're aiding muzzle rise, and so
But he's so used to shooting 338s and 300s, everything, it's
Yeah.
like recoil level. He didn't
Like, oh, this thing barely moves.
It moved less when it was right.
that's funny.
Uh,
Times.
yeah, he shot pretty well. Oh,
Well, we beat that dead horse.
Yeah, I think we got some pretty decent
It's fun.
content there.
I think some pretty good conclusions there, right?
Yeah.
It's like, go shoot a match, figure out a way. Don't worry about it. If you're not going to go shoot one, there's other ways to replicate and gain some of the similar benefits that a match might give you with your range sessions instead. So
Yeah. Do we need a conclusion, or will they just chop it off?
all the awkward ones, we always say big gulp, right?
Well,
That's Ian,
big
right?
gulps, huh?
Ian's not here, so we can't. Yeah, big gulp,
I like it.
If you like what you're hearing here, please take a second and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for topics you'd like discussed or questions you want answered on the podcast. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram or send us an email to podcast@gunworks.com. Also, be sure and check out our full offering of long-range gear at gunworks.com. Use promo code LRP for free shipping on any order.